It can be incredibly easy to overspend on perfume, and here are 5 proven strategies I use to avoid this. If this is your first time watching, hello, my name is Anya. I love fragrances and I talk about them here every single week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, along with a ton of bonus content in between. I love talking about a whole spectrum of perfumes, from affordable to designers to niche. I truly believe there's something out there for everyone, no matter how much money you're willing to spend on a scent. If you want to go for something a little bit more budget friendly and yet wonderful, while still or if you might want to go for something that's a little bit more artisanal and niche, there is definitely something out there for everyone. But sometimes it can be a little bit easy to overspend on perfumes, and as someone who tries to be as financially conscious as possible, here are some 5 strategies that I always go for, and these are not as obvious as you might think. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing, especially if you're starting out, is to smell as much as possible. Your nose gets more refined and you're able to discern what you like and what you don't like if you're able to smell as many different perfumes and scent profiles as you can. What does this involve? This involves going into department stores, going into your Sephora or your Ulta, and just smelling as much as possible. Try to cross-reference with Fragrantica or iFragrance and kind of get a sense of, okay, if a fragrance has this kind of scent pyramid or this kind of note structure or this scent profile, what will it smell like, and do I like it or do I not like it? And with that in mind, then you can kind of make a more educated decision about what you like, instead of trying to depend on other people to tell you what your preferences should be. There's really only one way to get to know fragrances, and that is simply to smell them. So if you are starting out with fragrances, I would maybe avoid buying as many fragrances when you start out, and focus more on trying to smell perfumes. You don't have to buy as many, you just have to be exposed to enough scent profiles to be educated with your nose and kind of discern what you like and what you don't like. I'm still smelling fragrances, I'm still trying to get better at it. There are some fragrances or there are some notes that when I first started out I was completely not into, but the more I smelled different varieties with those notes, I started to really like them. An example is patchouli. When I first started out in fragrances, I did not like patchouli. I thought it was too earthy. Now I know there are many different varieties of fragrances with the patchouli note in them, so now I like patchouli a lot more. So that's just one example, but I definitely recommend to smell as much as possible, especially when it comes to niche and designer fragrances, because those are pretty accessible. You might as well get your nose on them anyway. The next thing would be to curate your fragrance wardrobe. So what does that mean? Instead of buying a lot of fragrances once you immediately decide that you like a scent profile, really try to buy with intention. Make sure that you're not buying the same profile over and over and over again, because then not only are you spending a lot of money, you're also kind of dissuading yourself from trying new things. I consider myself a bit of a collector when it comes to fragrances, so I definitely do try to make sure that there are no redundant fragrances in my collection, and that is a goal that might seem to be rather easy, but in practice is a little bit difficult, especially since I do tend to blind buy a lot of perfumes. So sometimes I'm caught with a lot of really similar fragrances, and that can be a little bit annoying, especially if I have limited space, but also on the wallet when you're buying the same kind of profile over and over again with maybe like a vague similarity or a vague difference, it can be a little bit frustrating. So I definitely recommend to make sure that you're buying with intention and thinking, okay, so if I like this profile, how can I change it, or how can I do something that's a little bit different? Just make sure that you're not buying repetitive scents. Just like in fashion, you're not going to buy 5 or 10 different white t-shirts. You want to buy a few really good ones and then try to branch out from there. Same thing with fragrance. Make sure that you're buying with intention and really trying to curate a scent wardrobe that works for you. The next thing is to leverage samples and decants. This kind of goes back to my first point, to smell as much as possible. You can also smell and experience a lot of samples and decants to get an idea as to what you like and what you don't like. I especially encourage going out and trying to get some decants, because even if you have a sample, you probably won't be able to get the full experience or to smell the fragrance as much as you will with a decant, because with a decant you can overspray the fragrance, you can get a sense of the sillage, you can wear it a few times, and then you can kind of discover, okay, am I sick of this perfume now, or do I want more of it? I always have a rule with myself. Whenever I have a decant, I try to use it up, and if I don't want to use it up, then I probably don't want the fragrance, but if I use the decant up, I probably will be able to enjoy the full bottle. So that's my rule for myself. If I use up a decant, then I'll buy the perfume. If I don't, then I just have the decant as a reference, and that is totally fine. But I also will caution you against buying samples or decants that are overpriced. So there are some resellers out there that will not necessarily charge you a fair price for a sample or a decant. And when I was first getting into fragrances, I would kind of overspend on samples, and I would say that's one of the mistakes that I made when I was first getting into perfumes. I do remember specifically buying, I think maybe 6 samples for around $50, and they were not even new, they were secondhand, and that just seems crazy to me now. So that's why I'm saying, if you are buying samples or decants, make sure that you're buying them for a fair price. Don't overspend on them, because that can quickly snowball, and then you are left with spending a little bit of money and you have just samples. And that's totally fine too, if you're just starting out, but it's easily avoided. So I would, in hindsight, prioritize getting decants over samples, because you can actually use your decants more. I don't find myself using my samples as much. I just keep them for references, but I go through my decants a lot and I really enjoy them. A great way to do this is to go for fragrance subscription boxes. You can get a lot of options then. I also know that Fragrance Net, if you search in, or if you look for 8 ml samples or 8 ml decants, you can find those on their website, and you can experience a lot of niche fragrances for a really, really good price just by getting like an 8 ml size of it. It's very handy, very useful. That's how you can smell more. So I definitely recommend leverage samples and decants, but I do prefer decants because then you can actually experience the fragrance itself. The next thing is to beware the hype. So this is something that I think is especially important if you are someone who is a fragrance creator, especially if you're someone just starting out. I tend to remind myself about this one constantly, because there are so many fragrances that when they launch, everyone is talking about them, everyone's hyping that fragrance up. And I always try to avoid those fragrances unless I really do want to try the fragrance itself, because chances are if a fragrance is hyped, it will get hyped for a short window of time, and then people will just stop talking about it. There are some fragrance brands out there that are constantly releasing perfumes that are constantly hyped, and I actually do tend to avoid buying those perfumes, because I always think that if I am talking about a fragrance that everyone has already received in PR 2 weeks after people have started talking about it, there's really nothing new I can add to the conversation, and there's really no incentive for me to purchase that fragrance. Of course, I'm thinking of this from a content creation standpoint, but if you're a consumer, I would also caution you to kind of think about, okay, have I tried this fragrance personally, or have I had a chance to try it in store, or will I get a chance? And do I have the opportunity to kind of take a step back and look at what other creators, or what creators in general, are saying about this perfume? Because chances are, you might just see a perfume and you might look at the notes and the marketing, and you might think it's one way, but then after, let's just say, a week, when everyone has had a chance to kind of try that perfume, they will tell you what it's like, and you will likely get a variety of different opinions about this perfume, so you can then make a more educated decision regarding whether this perfume would be an addition to your collection, or if it's just something that you probably won't like anyway. An example of this would have been the, I think it was like the Miu Miu scent. It was inspired by this like mango dessert, and when people saw the marketing, everyone was like obsessed with it. And I think at the time it was only available in a few countries. It wasn't available in the US, and you definitely couldn't find it in store. So a lot of people ended up buying the fragrance, and I think they spent quite a bit of money on shipping. And then they tried it and they didn't like it. So that's just an example of a fragrance that was hyped up because of the marketing, because people thought it would be a certain way, but then when they tried it, it was just kind of like not the best thing. And that's an example of a hyped fragrance that just kind of like fell flat. So I would definitely say avoid the hype, because chances are you're going to end up blind buying or buying a lot of fragrances that you might not even use. So there's that. The next thing is just say no. And I know that sounds very cheesy, just say no. But I definitely think that kind of ties into my last point that I made about the hype. A lot of times, especially on social media, it can be very easy to look at a lot of people who have certain things, who have certain fragrances, and just feel like you have so much pressure to buy that thing in order to be taken seriously as someone who loves fragrance. And I definitely encourage you to kind of think about that, because sometimes You have to make a decision about what makes you happy and what you like rather than what looks good. An example of me implementing this into my own experience is the Parfum de Marly Delina bottles, like the Delina and the Delina Exclusive. Those are iconic fragrances. I love the way they smell. I have decants of, I think, Delina Exclusive, and I think it's an amazing perfume. I have not bought that fragrance because since everyone already has that perfume, there's really no point, in my opinion, of me spending a few $100s on a scent that everyone already has an opinion about, because what's something new that I can contribute to the conversation surrounding the Delina bottles? Like, there's really nothing. So that's why I am saying no to buying those fragrances, because I'd rather spend my money elsewhere. And that's just one example. You really have to be your own judge when it comes to buying or choosing a fragrance that's best for you. And I don't really subscribe to the idea that, oh yeah, fragrance influencers or content creators have a hand in people overspending. I think that's ridiculous. If you are an adult, you should make your own decisions about what benefits you. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for spending our own money, and I do think it's important to be considerate of that fact. Just because someone online says that this is a really good thing doesn't necessarily mean that you're obligated to buy it. And I do try to think about that a lot, especially as I'm trying to balance spending wisely with trying to create fragrance content for you, because I do feel a little bit of pressure, not really because no one's like making me, but I definitely do feel a sense of obligation to always be talking about something new. So if I was just using fragrances and not necessarily content creating, I don't think I'd have the collection I have. But because I'm creating content on the internet for you, because I want to make sure that you have something new and interesting to look at, I do feel a sense of obligation to buy fragrances, but I do try to make sure there's a bit of a balance. So that's something that I try to do, and I think I'm sometimes better at it, sometimes not so much. But yeah, I do try to remember that at the end of the day, it's my money, it's my life, and if I'm going to be spending a certain amount on fragrances, I'm the one that's going to have to reap the consequences of that, if there are any. And I think that's important information to pass along as well. If you're watching and you are seeing a lot of content creators or a lot of people buying perfumes, you don't necessarily have to do the same thing or do it in the same way. Don't buy fragrances or don't buy something just because someone on the internet told you to. It's important to be financially sound or be wise enough to decide what to do and what not to do. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you next time. Bye.